brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky, from 1879 to 1880. The Brothers Karamazov is the greatest novel that has ever been written. And I can say that after having read all of Dostoevsky's novels, this is really his magnum opus. This is his greatest novel of all. This is where the questions that he begins asking early on in his career, he comes to a fuller understanding of how to ask those questions and how to handle those mysteries. It was serialized, and that's why we say it was published from 1879 to 1880. So parts of it would come out at a time. So if you notice, it is divided into books. There are 12 books and then an epilogue. The number 12 is important. Dostoevsky was into reading the universe according to numbers, the same way that medievals would be. For example, if you consider how the Lord uses "let there be" in Genesis 10 times. So he creates the world in 10. And then there are the 10 words given at Mount Sinai. So the 10 words are the 10 commandments. There's an order intrinsic in the way that the Lord is teaching us about himself, that there are ways of reading what the Lord is doing through numbers. And Dostoevsky would have understood this, and he pays attention to it in the way that he structures his work. So there is a lot of organization to this. It's divided into 12, and then it's also divided into 4 as in the 4 Gospels. So it's also given in sections like that as well. And in each part, as we go through, we will spend some time investigating what are the key moments in those books and what the import of that particular book is. As you're reading, try to imagine that you only have this book and you don't yet have the next one. So why does he structure it the way he does? What questions is he raising? How is he, as a writer, trying to hook you into the next section? And try to put yourself back into that audience, into that 19th century readership that would have been waiting for the next book to come out as it happened. The Brothers Karamazov was by far his most popular work. If we look a little bit at Dostoevsky's life, we'll see that he went back and forth from being a popular writer to a not popular writer. His childhood in Moscow, so he would have been in the shadow of the Kremlin, so to speak, and in the center of things, but his family would have been on the outskirts. He was later then sent to St. Petersburg, where he received military training. And during his time in St. Petersburg, he became part of a group called the Petreshki Circle. And this was a group of Christian socialists who wanted to change the world. They wanted to do great things. And Dostoevsky was a young man with high ideals, and he joins this circle. Now, this circle is what will eventually get him into trouble. What happens is that this group of people, not Dostoevsky himself, but the group of people were willing to achieve their utopian ideals at all cost. If they were going to change the world for the good, whoever stood in their way was easy to push over. And by push over, I mean they were okay with murder and assassination. And this troubled Dostoevsky because as much as he wanted to change the world, he was unsure about doing it at all cost. He didn't want the end to justify the means, and yet he was associated with this group. And this association got him into trouble. One of the greatest examples of this is he gets imprisoned and he is supposed to be executed. And the way that he describes the execution, it comes up in several of his novels again and again as he replays this important moment in his life. They are lined up in front of a firing squad, and they are blindfolded, and they are awaiting the rifle shots, which are then shot into the air as the Tsar sends a message in dramatically saying, "Stop the execution." So it was a mock execution. And for Dostoevsky, this completely changes his life. The mock execution was made him face his own mortality and the things that he believed and the things that he valued. And instead of being executed, he was sent to Siberia. And for the next 7 years, he spent time in those camps, living among criminals and peasants, and really beginning to understand the Russian people and the things that he was idealistic about before. He became a realist in a way that was much more deeper and meaningful than he had been when he was part of the Dostoevsky circle. So he came to really understand what it is that he wanted and thought about things. The only book he was able to read was the New Testament. So during this time, he's reading the New Testament and trying to understand it. He's trying to understand these people that he's around. If you want to read The House of the Dead, that is a semi-autobiographical work in which he really lays out the things that he learned while he was in camp and the different personalities that he interacted with. After he returned from Siberia, he was not invited back into Russia. He was living in exile for a while as a convict. A forgiven one, but not really, trying to earn his place back into literary circles and back into the esteem of the Tsar, which was really important during this time period. So he's traveling Europe, he's living abroad, a long time in Germany and then sometime in Italy. He does visit London during this time and gets to see the Crystal Palace, an idea that will come up later in his work. And he's also getting allured by the gambling scene in Germany, and he falls prey to that temptation and becomes a serious gambler, losing quite a bit of money and trying to pay off debts. There's this way that he meets his second wife. His first wife is really not that interesting of a story. He fell in love with a married woman. Her husband died. He falls in love with her and marries her, then realizes he never should have been in love with her and that she's actually a really horrible person, but does not get out of the marriage. And then she gets sick and dies, and he has her stepson to raise, who by that point is mostly an adult. And then the second wife, who becomes really the person who helps with his estate and who helps with his letters and the continuation of his legacy after he dies. And her name is Anna Grigorievna. And Anna he meets because she was a typist, and he was up against a deadline to turn in a novel, or else he was going to lose all rights to his literary estate. And he was about to gamble away everything. By this point in time, he had written Crime and Punishment. He had also written a small work called The Double, and this book that he writes for this deadline is called The Gambler. He had 1 month to write it, and so the stenographer, Anna, comes over to his house and is quickly typing up everything that he's saying as he's trying to write this novel, which is The Gambler. And he turns it in exactly on time, able to secure his literary inheritance, but it doesn't stop him from gambling. So he continues gambling. He does marry Anna, who helps quite a bit, trying to make a virtuous man out of him. And there's some letters here in which you get to see their relationship, and it's really quite beautiful family life that he then gets to secure with Anna. But they are away from the main scene of things in Russia for quite a while. He does eventually get back to Russia and sets up his home in St. Petersburg around 1876. So this is near the end of his life, but of course he doesn't know it's near the end of his life. He has several children. He is a great father. He loves spending time with his family. And Dostoevsky was himself an epileptic, so he had seizures. This was before the time of medication, and so his young son Alyosha, who I think was 3 or 4 at the time, has an epileptic seizure and dies. And Dostoevsky felt the guilt over this because he had passed down his epilepsy to his young son. And so when Alyosha dies, Dostoevsky then enters into a monastery, not as a monk, but to spend some time thinking and meditating and praying to the Lord over the loss of his child. And it is from this loss of his son that we get the Brothers Karamazov. So these questions that have come up in his earlier work about what is evil and what is goodness, and can a person be good without God, are now changed and put into the context of what to do about a good God who allows such darkness and suffering. How then to be good when this is the mysterious God that we serve? And that is how Dostoevsky begins writing this grand work. A little bit about the plot of the book. The Brothers Karamazov can be somewhat of a difficult book to follow, if only for some very small hurdles to overcome, the name changes of the characters. You will hear Alyosha Karamazov discussed as Alexei, which is just a nickname, or Ivan, Ivanya, Ivanka. You also have Dmitri being called Dmitya, things like that. The names also might throw you if you have the name Alexei Fyodorovich Karamazov. Fyodorovich is his patronymic, meaning the name after his father. So it's Alexei, the son of Fyodor, with the last name Karamazov. And that's how you can read the names. If you see from this slide, which is a little bit cut off on the side, on the left there would be the names Dmitri and Katrina, apologies. But Grushenka, Dmitri wants Grushenka, Fyodor wants Grushenka, hence the arrows. Grushenka tries to want Alyosha, but that's a little bit confusing. Alyosha wants Lisa. Lisa thinks that she wants Ivan at one point. Ivan wants Katerina. So this is the problem at the beginning. We have chaos. And anybody who knows how to study genre is that stories that begin in chaos often end in comedy or marriage, where all is set right again and all will be reordered. So if you know genre theory and you see this mess that's put in front of you, you can kind of hope that this mess will be unraveled and put into order by the end of the work, especially when it's done by a Christian author. I'd like to open by looking at the From the Author section in the beginning of the book. This is the first page, and this is from Dostoevsky. It is not from his narrator. So don't get confused with the two voices. This one is supposed to be Dostoevsky's voice. And I'm going to read parts of it out loud and walk through this opening section. It's about 2 pages. Starting out on the biography of my hero, Alexei Fyodorovich Karamazov, I find myself in some perplexity. Namely, that while I do call Alexei Fyodorovich my hero, still I myself know that he is by no means a great man. So that I can foresee the inevitable questions such as, what is notable about your Alexei Fyodorovich, that you should choose him for your hero? What has he done? To whom is he known, and for what? Why should I, the reader, spend my time studying the facts of his life? What we see here is an invitation from Dostoevsky. He is talking to his readers. He wants his readers to be involved in the story, to feel, to question. This will be important as we read through and we see different narrators and we see different writers. Dostoevsky is thinking about his role between the writer and the reader, and he is writing for the reader. At the end of his life, in 1881, he gives a speech at the Great Pushkin Monument. They were memorializing their famous poet. And he gives this speech, and everyone stood and applauded, and even Turgenev, who Dostoevsky and Turgenev, the author, had this kind of a headbutting relationship. But even Turgenev throws his arms around Dostoevsky with this great speech, and people followed him saying, we are better people because of your Karamazovs. So what his intention was to really help people, to make them better people, and it turned out it worked. I mean, people responded to this novel. So in the opening here, there's a level of humility from the author in which he's acknowledging that the reader is going to question him, that the reader is not going to sense that there's an authority from the author. And Dostoevsky acknowledges that, which is quite beautiful. It's very hospitable as an author to the reader. He also calls his character the hero. He is focusing on this story as the movement of this one person, Alyosha. And if you remember that that's the name of his son that he lost, then it becomes even more meaningful, right? Now he's imagining his son older and giving this almost heroic quality to his son. Whereas you'll notice Alexei's father in this novel, Fyodor Karamazov, is the same name as Fyodor Dostoevsky. So Dostoevsky names the most villainous or vicious character after himself in this story, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. So who are we as readers supposed to respond to? Who are we supposed to see ourselves in? And I think there's multiple answers to that. I think we're supposed to see ourselves in several of the characters, and the question being asked of us is, which character do we want to be like? And where do we see the value of this story? We also get from this opening quite a fun, almost Edgar Allan Poe opening, in which there's a tragic murder. There's a story that has affected everyone for the last 13 years. And we get a sense that we're not only being invited into this story to see ourselves in it and to become better people, but also to be captivated. Dostoevsky understood that novel reading was not just about edification. It's about pleasure. It's about beauty. It's about enjoying what is in front of you. And so as a writer, he is what is called a realist, a higher realist. He was trying to ask these internal, enduring questions that were transcendent, but at the same time, realism, the greatest kind of realism, in which it invites readers to see their lives this way as where are we finding our enjoyment and who do we want to be? And these are the questions that Dostoevsky begins the book.